Yeah, here we are on to the last session of the two-day international conference. And welcome you all to this last session of this two-day international conference on imagining the post-coronavirus world, which I hope this last session would carve out a way to move ahead collectively, maybe with different perspectives, to think of the ways in which we could transform the deliberations done over the 2 days into something meaningful. And I invite Professor Bashabi Fraser to take up the lead on this. Professor Bashabi.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank AURO University, for inviting me, to the Vice Chancellor and Dr. Singh, Professor Welukar and Dr. Singh for organizing this conference. It's been a truly transnational and transcontinental exchange for all of us. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the IT team for the magnificent performance where they enabled this international dialogue in real time, which has been wonderful. It's been great to listen to all the collaborators and speakers, and thank you for sharing your prescience, your concerns and commendations, and the student volunteers for your support and presence, which is most inspiring for academics, because if you're not there, we'll never be there. So thank you. And I also enjoyed the 2 sessions I chaired. I learned a lot from them. Some of the stuff that I'll be saying will be reflections on what I've heard as well, because a lot of the ideas resonate with me. Can I just begin by saying I have a lot of questions that I confront, like, will there be a post-coronavirus world? Will we learn new lessons? Will we change the way we live? Will we be able to pressurize our governments to think differently, moving on from supporting corporate houses, business monopolies and globalization, to give up their anti-migrant rhetoric, to go back to social responsibility, to ensure social inclusion and justice? And can we look beyond strong leaders and populist politics, and have a world where othering can be put behind us, and we look for a more inclusive society? I want to just stress, many people have been talking, and especially in the last session, about Amitav Ghosh, the great derangement, the whole gradualist theory versus the idea of cataclysmic happenings, which we cannot ignore anymore. Are they telling us something? And coming from English literature, I have been thinking of how we should go back to teaching literature, how we should reorganize the canon, and what should be our perspective. And for me, Cheryl Glotfelty's Eco-Criticism Reader in 1998 sums it up very simply as a relationship between literature and the physical environment. So adopting an earth-centric perspective is one of the ways I see our way forward. We assess literature. There has been an intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services by leading professor scientists. And they are actually warning against Earth's resources being eroded, which actually supports the life systems, the life support systems that we need as a human race to survive. And there's been a lot of writing, and the scientists are saying that we should take human beings, the creatures on this earth, and nature as a continuum, and not separate them, not segregate them into different entities. And once we can accept that, it ceases to be just an existentialist battle for us. And we either win it or we perish. The other thing that the IPBES scientists have also said, that future pandemics will occur more frequently. And so they will return. They'll be even more deadly unless we take steps now to protect the world's resources. So if we are to ensure a post-pandemic world, I think we need to stop deforestation, go back to thinking about afforestation, create economies that do not rely on the burning of fossil fuels, but develop renewable energy technology. We refrain from intensive farming, uncontrolled expansion of agriculture, construction, mining, and industry, so that the diseases do not spill over from our forests, and the forests continue to house the creatures who inhabit them, but are contained and don't allow pandemics to reach and destroy human life. One other reflection that I have is the pandemic comes at the heels of the bushfires in Australia, and which raged from June till this January. And we saw what that there were these it was called the Indian Ocean the bipole, in which we had a warm current on one side in the west, which caused fire in floods in Africa, and then we had the cold stream in the east, which caused a huge drought. But the continuing burning of fossil fuel, of coal for energy in Australia was much criticized. And then we had the bushfires, which actually destroyed hectares of land, thousands of hectares of land, and also 1 billion creatures, many of them endangered, and many of them are now facing extinction. So yes, I have the figure, 18.6 million hectares were destroyed. So again, we have forest burning, we have cataclysmic events. Should we continue to think about borders as just political, or should we think of the world which needs to move beyond borders of the mind, emotional and physical, and think of the world as one? And I think for this, literature becomes very important as we adopt approaches that are, as I said, earth-centric, that are transnational, that have a transnational meaning and message, and that look at a post-colonial world. And when I say post-colonial, I mean beyond the neoliberal, neo-colonial world, where war stopped, where we are experiencing a ceasefire right now. And we can see what that has done to the skies above us, to birdsong coming back, and we have also seen that plane travel does not necessarily have to be frequent. As we are sitting here today in our own room, it would be really nice if we did meet up. But I think this conference has made possible that we can look forward to a post-coronavirus world only if we change the way we live, think, and we pressurize the governments to not to have a society which looks after multinational needs. But I just want to finish off by quoting one of our journalists, Nesreen Malik. She's writes for the Guardian. She's an investigative journalist. She's from Sudan. And she said a line which has stayed with me, that migrants have always been blamed. And we've and immigration, as we know, and for draining the economy. But today we consider them key workers who actually sustain the economy. So they don't drain it, they sustain it for us, the key workers who do jobs for which they are poorly paid, and they're held in contempt. But today suddenly we need them. Are we going to, if there is a post-coronavirus world, will we forget them, or will we reinstate labor rights, workers' rights as human rights and equity for all? So those are my thoughts, which I'll leave with you. And
yeah, thank you. Professor Nayar. Nayar, sir.
Yeah, thanks for that extensive summing up and future plans. I doubt whether there's anything to debate in what you have said. It's a program of action. I'm particularly fascinated by your suggestion about the role of literature and, in a wider sense, the role of the humanities in a post-pandemic world. There were questions I noticed on the purpose of theory and the debates about storytelling, the role of literature, and you put that across saying the role of literature, which focused on an artistic approach, will be central. I was also struck yesterday in the conversation since yesterday about a couple of things which I think also need to be factored in as perhaps part of the methodology. That was Scott's point about the normal and the peril, or if there is something like a normalized peril or a perilous normality in which we currently exist. So the question that Professor Fraser asked about whether there is actually a post-corona world, the scientists but the state of continuously normalized perilousness that Scott was talking about might be something to consider as a not quite science fiction scenario, but something that we live with now. The other points from Professor Besson and today from Greta Gaard's exemplary talk on interbeing, I think are excellent and exceptional takeaways. The post-humanist move towards interspecies worlding, hinted at in many speakers, but particularly focused and connected to into the arguments by Professor Greta Gaard, I think are crucial. Examples have ranged from Isaac Asimov to the novel that was just discussed in the afternoon session, Severance. And in most cases, one of the things we discovered was concepts that inform sociological analysis invariably come from the literary readings of texts, and literary readings of texts are generated by an awareness of sociological conditions. I'm not quite sure I see where the distinctions lie in many cases, especially things that are as cataclysmic, as wide-ranging, as hyper-objected. I don't know whether there is a way of using it, using Tim Morton's word in that fashion, as a pandemic. But I think if you put these concepts together from Scott's opening remarks yesterday on the normal and their peril, all the way down to what you've just pointed out as the role of the literary, and the questions that have come up around the role of the literary, but also in the larger sense of, is there a public humanities now where the humanities have to be directed towards public action? Or is the kind of humanities that has been done so far adequately public enough? I'll leave us with that, and I'm sure there'll be more points coming in where we can argue these out. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Scott, you may join in.
Thank you. Well, thank you to Professor Fraser and Professor Nayar for leading us off with these concluding thoughts. I'm hesitating to know where to jump in. I'd like to respond immediately to Professor Nayar's thoughts about the public humanities and whether we are doing enough, those of us who work within the humanities, to demonstrate the public relevance of the work that we do in our particular training and our particular disciplines. I would say initially that this situation with the pandemic has immediately had a concrete effect on the way we do our work, on our style of teaching, our way of interacting with students. Many of us were called, within a matter of days, to change the habits that have been ingrained in us for years. Our way of using technology, our relationship to students, and of course, this conference itself, as many people have said, demonstrates the possibility of using technology in a positive and effective way to do our work. I would say that it is possible to weave a public dimension into the work that we do as scholars, as teachers, as citizens. And in fact, it was about a month ago that I helped with a webinar for the European Association for the Study of Literature, Culture, and Environment, specifically on the public environmental humanities. And there were 7 graduate students from throughout Europe participating in this webinar, in which we discussed various ways in which we could use our research and our expertise in order to reach out to different audiences and public audiences, decision makers. And in fact, the summary of this webinar is available on the EASLC website, the website for this European organization. And I can provide that to this group if you're interested in any of the resources that we discussed. Also, I would say that for several years now, I have been including various specific tasks with my students designed to get them to think about their research not only as being useful for small specialized audiences, but to asking them to take their seminar papers and write op-eds or press releases based on their seminar papers. So in fact, as we speak, my students right now are completing long and detailed seminar papers and 800-word op-eds based on their seminar papers. And many of them have even sent these out to newspapers and magazines and websites. So even as they conduct their traditional and formal research, they're thinking of this research as being relevant to society. And in some cases, they're actually writing about the COVID situation in their papers and their op-eds. So I believe there is a way of very quickly retooling our traditional work in order to engage in a kind of public fashion. I had actually prepared a few remarks, and I'll try to do this very briefly because I want to hear from other people who are participating in this final session. A few remarks about this weekend's conference. I want to say that one of the lessons that I'm taking away with me from the talks I was able to attend this weekend is the sense that our experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has been highly mediated or shaped by the kinds of language and imagery we're being fed through various sources, journalists, governments, and so forth. Even this weekend's conference has altered my sense of what the pandemic is and how it's taking place. COVID-19 is not a single definable phenomenon, and our understanding of it changes as we take in new frames, new styles of communicating, new discourse. For instance, during some of the sessions that I was able to attend, I found myself fascinated by the whole notion of COVID-related humor. And I was particularly asking myself about the tone of this humor. How is humor used? And what meaning can we take from the fact that something that is so dire and dangerous is resulting in humorous memes or jokes? I find myself wondering whether there's actual hilarity in this humor, or rather a kind of angry, bitter way of expressing disgust and frustration, often directed at inept or corrupt leaders. And if we're repurposing such discourse frames as zombie narratives, imagery taken from the environmental movement, to describe industrial contamination, and even imagery from war, does this mean that we don't yet have a language available to us that fully matches the coronavirus? How might we recycle earlier conceptual frameworks and linguistic frameworks, perhaps even dating back to plague narratives from the 1820s, and modify these inherited frameworks to suit our 21st century predicament? And this is related to what Professor Fraser and Professor Nayar were saying about the use of literature. Often this literature comes from utterly different contexts and time periods, but we might take this inherited language and retool it to suit our current situation. At the same time, perhaps we need to invent new language to describe the situation we're in. Many of my younger students spend their time not reading literature, but playing video games. They exist in the gaming world. This has been reinforced to me powerfully by a class that I'm teaching now, an undergraduate writing class, in which the students routinely write about gaming. This is the reality that they live in. And perhaps those of us who come from a different generation, we need to open our minds to the possibility that there are forms of discourse, such as video games, that we hardly even know about, but which have a kind of interactivity, a level of engagement that is quite different from more traditional forms of expression like literature and even film. So maybe the new language to match the pandemic and our sense of all being involved in the situation, maybe we need an interactive, procedural kind of rhetoric that comes from the platform of video games and virtual technology. I also come away from this conference with a reinforced sense of how the coronavirus is being used opportunistically by various people to push forward potentially totalitarian systems of social management and surveillance, even in hitherto democratic societies where individual privacy and freedom have been prized. And I would associate this with the observation I tried to make yesterday about the aspect of COVID mind that I call vulnerability and precarity. Ironically, I do believe in careful government management of social distancing and human movement, and yet the fear of abusive structures of surveillance and control also have the potential to be scary outcomes of the current crisis. And yet I come away from this weekend's meeting with the feeling that there are some positive opportunities emerging from the crisis. This conference itself is evidence that the crisis, including the frustrating and disruptive lockdowns in many of our countries, has provided opportunity for deep and reflective, deep reflection on human nature and human societies, and the opportunity to slow down and look at and listen to and celebrate the world we inhabit, if only from the windows of our homes. This conference, which is now coming to an end, has reinforced my feeling that there are opportunities for thought leaders to derive inspiration for positive social change from the pandemic, especially if we're willing to think and act boldly. As Professor Welukar, who is on my screen right now, suggested at the outset of the meeting, we have the opportunity to denote 2020 as year zero, a new year zero, just as many tried to do in the wake of the terrible bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Yes, we need to ask such questions as how do we learn to live together, but in asking such a question, I would define we not only as the human species, but as a reference to the wider biosphere. Finally, I would just like to say that I think AURO University, with its emphasis on integral and transformational learning, is a very good host for this conference, in which many of us are thinking of ways of integrating different levels of experience and styles of thought with personal and societal transformation. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Professor Greta Gaard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With others, I would second the gratitude for being able to participate in this amazing opportunity to talk with scholars and thinkers around the world, and for the technological expertise of the platform that allows us to communicate seamlessly we can't do this in the same state, okay? So the way you're doing this is fabulous. I really appreciate it. So I took literally your way ahead idea, and the talk that I gave about air, breath, and embodiment is part of an article that is forthcoming with IEL, the Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment, that Scott Slovic edits. And it's inspired by my experience with smog. Actually, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I began bringing together a mindfulness practice of breath and air with the way that it affects our bodies. There is a Harvard study that's now being peer-reviewed that connects exposure to smog and particulate matter and greater vulnerability to the coronavirus. So we can see that people living in areas of air pollution, which are, technical workers, professional workers, but also many people who are living in poverty, people who are living in homeless camps, people who are marginalized by society on the basis of race and class, that these communities are strongly affected. And I just wanted to remind people of resources. Perhaps Jai Jing's Under the Dome, the documentary in China that looked at the smog in Beijing, is still available on YouTube. It came out in 2015, and she uses maternalist rhetoric, which people have various views about, but it's her concern for what we are leaving to our children and to next generations. And this is a rhetoric that is used by Mari Boina, who is a Sami singer in Norway. She also includes this in one of her songs about what we as elders are leaving to the next generation is not what we wanted to leave. So a few resources. This one is called Smog Town, and this is about my hometown, Los Angeles. This is about India, the Great Smog of India, which is a really excellent resource. And then most recently, Beth Gardner's Choked. She writes for The Guardian. And here she takes a global perspective on smog. Folks, smog has not gone away, even though most people are not flying right now. It's going to resurge. We're worried about the pent-up consumerist desire that's going to springboard forward once people get the go-ahead. And we know that this summer could be one of the hottest in the last 5 years because of the delayed carbon dioxide, that even though we are, stalled, motionless mostly, what we have done, like dependent origination, is still coming. It's still coming to us. So in that context, I like to think about affect studies and ask, what are we doing to give our students hope? What are we doing to help our students feel empowered to face the many intersecting crises that generations before them are leaving to them as their inheritance? What I have been doing, we all answer this differently, what I have been doing is bringing together the affect of happiness and the practices of happiness in a course that I'm teaching on climate change, species extinction, and the rigged economy. So people don't think of these things together, I know. And I'm calling the course Sustainable Happiness. That is, we need the affective resilience to engage with the crises of today. And so I'm using two different kinds of texts. Sonia Lyubomirsky, The How of Happiness, and she has 12 happiness practices in here. And so I've created exercises, and you can find these things on the web. And this is part of their assignments. They need to do the happiness practice of generosity, of forgiveness, of savoring their food, savoring taking a walk outside. So I use Sonia Lyubomirsky, and I use Matthew Ricard's Happiness, he's a Buddhist monk, and he looks at the Dharma from the practice of happiness and argues that we are in this situation we are because we have mistaken the satisfaction of desire with happiness, the satisfaction of craving with happiness, and that is the wrong path, that there is another path to happiness. And it's the 12 happiness practices. I also want to recommend Sarah Ray's book, A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety. It's written for undergraduates. It's not a theory text. And she's using it in her courses. This just came out. And it helps people manage the distress that we feel when we are confronting these things, because depressed and paralyzed people don't form a rebellion. So they don't organize, they don't take action, and we need people to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. That was very thoughtful. And thanks for alerting us to those wonderful books. We move on to Serenella.
Thank you very much. So inspiring. And of course, I really want to thank everybody, also my colleagues and friends that are sharing their experiences now in this conference and in this final panel. Of course, we are still elaborating ideas and practices about how to deal with this post-coronavirus world, but actually post-corona, we are still very much within. Therefore, perhaps we don't have taken the right distance enough from this the core of this experience yet to be able to really think things in an orderly way. But of course, the first thing that I felt the urge to emphasize was this absolute need to incorporate this anxiety, or anyway this emergency, into teaching. And of course, for us who teach eco-criticism, environmental humanities, or literary topics, the environment or the landscape and climate change are the hot topics. So we cannot think of course, teaching something unrelated to the global crisis of the environment. And the coronavirus is incredibly powerful as a topic to be combined together. Is a sort of reactant element. So it lets things emerge, or anyway, it's a sort of, I don't know, it's an element that put together with the climate crisis creates this increased visibility. And I think we have to really use the coronavirus as a sort of accelerator for our imagination. Therefore, I think that we have to emphasize these teaching practices that at the same time enable us to see more, to think about the past, because this is not the only pandemics that we are, of course, that the humankind has experienced. There are many, of course, and perhaps many that were much more dangerous in the past. We tend sometimes to forget the lesson from the past. And I think we have to retrieve these lessons. And of course, it's very important to provide historical instruments, literary instruments, but also to increase this ability of the humanities to speak to other tribunes. The way, for example, Scott and Greta, and I think you all put it, about, for example, the public relevance of what we do. It's incredibly important. So I found myself just a month ago in the situation of having to deal with this new teaching condition with my students, many of whom were not able, for example, to bridge the digital divide. That was also an important issue, and many of whom were dealing with coronaviruses in their family. And for example, one of my students lost her father during the pandemic. So we were in the process of adapting and to the new teaching mode, and we were in the process of trying to understand what was going on. So I had to teach them things. So my course was about environmental issues, and they had, of course, to read things we were trying to incorporate the present into even more deeply into what we were doing. And so I found myself also in the position of having to write things, for example, op-eds for Italian newspapers and blogs that would explain the situation with, of course, clearer words, because we don't have to forget something, that if the environmental humanities is important for the public, it is it in a way that it can really create understandable narrative about what is going on. So we don't have to provide narrative of despair. We have to provide narrative of clarity. We have to provide actually instruments to understand that, for example, so the coronavirus is one of the many aliens that we deal with in our everyday life. And we have to, because of course also our bodily existence is connected not only to the entire biosphere, but also to the internal biosphere that we, of course, carry in ourselves. And of course, also very important is the kind of pact, intergenerational pact or interspecies pact that this coronavirus is asking us actually to make. We have to actually not only respond to the crisis that is, of course, entailing the well-being of other species that are now basically enjoying a sort of, I don't know how to sort of a holiday when we humans are in our homes. We have decreased our level of impact, and it's a sort of jubilee for the other species. But actually, the tragedy is that when we will be out, perhaps it will be even worse. So we have to understand that, as Greta was saying, we need this interspecies agreement of actually of mutual assistance, because we need everybody, but we also need to think in more deeply in terms of intergenerational cooperation. And I would like to think, for example, of all the elderly people that are dying these very moments. A few days ago, the chief of the WHO, the World Health Organization, Hans Kluge, has declared that the 50% of the people that are dying for the coronavirus are these elderly people in nursing homes, for example. And in Italy, for example, the situation of nursing home is particularly severe because, as I have to say, bad decisions were made. They decided, for example, in some of the northern regions, very efficient regions, Lombardy, Piedmont, so Milan, Turin, to allow in the month of February, at the end of the month of February, beginning of March, they allowed COVID patients in nursing homes, actually as a sort of a solution to free the hospitals. And this has been just like, this has been really a sort of ecological catastrophe. It has been just like the Deepwater Horizon coming to the nursing home, because it has the number of patients, of COVID patients in this nursing home has literally exploded. And these people were left basically to die alone without the comfort of their families. So even the coronavirus can also be thought of as a huge ecological catastrophe for this the elderly people, for our old people, and of course the children. The children are actually they are undergoing a deprivation, which is an emotional deprivation, a physical deprivation. So we really have to and think of the Kawasaki disease that is increasing in children. It's a disease that leads to heart failure. So it's really a very, very bad thing. And so we need to rethink all this pact, intergenerational pact, interspecies pact. And also we need to also think a little bit more deeply about how we express, for example, our social connections. Now we are talking in terms of social distancing. I think this is a horrible this is a horrible way to put it, because we don't have to be socially distant. We have to be perhaps for a while physically distant, but we have to talk about social proximity now more than ever, and because we really need to rethink of our the way to express also our emotional support to the people that we deal with. So in the classroom, there is no day that I don't actually physically touch my students when I'm in the classroom now, and they rely actually on my physical presence very much. Now I have to find new ways to be with them, not in a way which is socially distant, but which is emotionally extremely close. So we have to also think of the words we use to express this this practice that of course will continue after the virus. And of course, teaching together climate change and pandemics is a necessity. And also we have to actually to pay a tribute to the writers that we have lost to the coronavirus. And I would like to, of course, think of Luis Sepulveda, who is actually was very engaged with environmental topics, and of course is one of the writers that we have lost to this virus. But again, we really have to create more coalitions, more connections, and of course, this is a work to be built. We don't have answers yet, but at the same time, we have to leave to actually to take this jump from where we stand and try to really give a meaning which is public and emotional to what we do now more than ever, because of course we are theorists, we think, but we have to be able to incorporate also the bodily powerful, the power of being actually emotionally present with the. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Johan.
Yes.
Johan. Yeah,
yes.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, let's move. Go ahead.
Yes. First, I want to raise a point that has surfaced many times during this conference. And the COVID-19 virus may be new, but the economic, the gender, and the environmental crises that this virus has energized have been around for a very long time. And sociologists, social work researchers, post-colonial scholars have spent a long time addressing them. And we have something important to say. And I think we need to become even better at saying these things outside of the academy. And I think that is one way in which we can move forward. And this connects to a discussion that emerged towards the end of Professor Greta Gaard and Professor Serenella Iovino's panel. How do we translate theory and scholarship, often a lifetime of theory and scholarship, into activism and into the foundation for actual interaction between societies and between human and non-human life? How can we communicate with the politicians that are tasked with running our societies and the entrepreneurs that direct its development by investing in certain systems and by not investing in others? And I think this conference has been phenomenal, not only because it has helped us hone our thinking, but also because it has involved decision makers to some extent. And I think it is necessary for scholars who have been working on precarity, on eco-precarity, on gender inequality, and so on, to seek to communicate with power in new ways so that we can impact the creation of the post-corona world. And I think this is going on, as Scott just mentioned. Many of those who have organized and contributed to this conference have already published opinion pieces in newspapers, and you've done that, Tavish has done that, and many others as well. And of course, engaging in activism is also important. However, I just want to mention one more possibility here. This moment in time may be an opportunity even to shift the general understanding of what is normal. And I think we're used to working against a neoliberal society that often appears as an invisible normativity in social discourse. It's taken for granted. And now that it's becoming increasingly clear, as Tabish Kap observed today, that neoliberalism has failed, that it's failed society, that it's failed people, that it's failed the planet. Can we help upset that state of things, that understanding of society, of neoliberalism, that sense of normativity? And I think there is I think we can, and I think that's actually an interest in that we do this. And I just want to share a very strange experience I had very recently. 2 weeks ago, I was extremely surprised to be invited to a one-day seminar in Stockholm organized by an association that caters for the major real estate owners in Sweden. And there's one more historian who's going to be part of this meeting, but all the other speakers are CEOs of major Swedish corporations and the major banks. And there's also a minister from the Swedish government speaking. And I'm not entirely sure that they know what kind of work it is that I do, but I'm extremely happy to accept this opportunity because it allows me to speak quite directly to power. But I also have to think of the fact that they identified the center and my own work as somehow possibly relevant for the formation of a post-corona world, even when that world is created still through politics and through corporations. So that's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Like Vice Chancellor Rajan Welukar.
So thank you, Mr. Om, for giving me an opportunity to say something in the last. Thank you very much. I am here not to give a speech, but I am here just to say 3 words, which I will take 3-4 minutes. One is thank you, second is congratulations, and the third is best wishes for the future. Friends, there is much learning to all of us, not those who are attending the conference, but to the entire world. This COVID-19 has given us an opportunity, as I had earlier said. This pandemic, out of the pandemics and epidemics came on this earth since last 5,000 years, is really a different one. We all are talking since last 5 decades about globalization. But in the real sense, in a lighter vein, let me tell you that this COVID-19 has shown us what globalization is. It has reached each and every country. It has not left anybody. It has not discriminated between A country or B country. It has reached everybody. In spite of different weathers, in spite of race, religion, caste, everything. We need to learn from this negative thing positively. Still, we are living in a world where there is a discrimination. Still, we have 2 kinds of worlds. One is poor and the other is rich. Still, we are discriminating. We need to come out of that. And that is why I said that this pandemic has given us an opportunity. Let us think very, very differently, as you have discussed since last 2 days. When I was taking a bath in the morning, a thought came to my mind, as I said in the inaugural session, that I am not a social scientist. I'm a statistician. So one formula came to my mind. As in the inaugural session, I talked about development. I mean, what development is, if my life is becoming better tomorrow than today, that is development. If my life is getting better and better every day, that is the development which I was talking about. Not of the progress. We are progressing, but whether we are developing or not is a question. And these are the questions which we should ask. Now the whole world is talking about new normal. Do we think that we will not have problems in new normal? The only thing which we can do is we can reduce these problems. And we need to work together to reduce these problems. So the formula which came to my mind is, the problems in new normal is equal to progress divided by development. And if your development is 0, then you will have infinite problems. Because anything divided by 0 is infinite. And therefore, we have to play with the denominator, and that denominator is development. The moment denominator increases, and the problems will be less. The moment development is equal to progress, then we will achieve 1. Then both of them will be equal. We need progress, at the same time we need development. And therefore, let us focus on how do we reach out to the policy makers? How do we reach out to the next generation? Because I say, and I believe, that our generation has exploited the nature more than any generation. Maybe our generation or 1 or 2 earlier generations, we have exploited the nature. And therefore, what was born out of that? A confused generation, which is called as millennial. This is what my daughter told me. She is a millennial. Now, they don't know. They're confused. And therefore, I say, it is our responsibility. If we have exploited, we need to work out towards a solution so that the future generations will not face the problems which these millennials have faced. It is our responsibility. And I'm sure all the resource persons, those who participated in this, are sensitive, which I could make out. And therefore, I have hope from all of you. We teach in schools respecting each other. But our focus first should be respecting the nature. If nature is there, we will survive. If it is not there, then we are talking about climate change. We need to think about it. If we don't think, then we will really not achieve what we are talking about. I say in a rhetoric manner in India that we know we don't have problem of knowing what to do, but we have a problem of not doing it. I think that is where we need to think how we can come out of this situation. I have a hope on the academicians, because if we look at the history, whether there were universities or there were no universities, but all the time there were academicians and there were researchers. These researchers and these academicians have played a very, very important role in understanding the transformation, positive or negative, which has taken place in this world over millions of years. And therefore, this time also, in this 0th year, we need to guide the policymakers. We need to guide our politicians, which they really need it across the globe. That is what I feel. Somebody has used the word reflection. We also need to understand this reflection. We need to change our mindset. When I talk to young people, I always say that you change your handset very often, but you should also change the mindset. Unless and until we change the mindset with the handset, whatever we are changing, we will not be able to achieve whatever. There are 4 infrastructures which we talk about. One is a physical infrastructure. The whole world has developed that physical infrastructure. Second, we in last 4 decades, we are talking about digital infrastructure. Yes, we have done much in this digital infrastructure. But still, people are facing problems in rural areas, in tribal areas, in Southeast Asia. And some part of Africa. We also talk about intellectual infrastructure. I'm sure we have developed all these things, physical infrastructure excellently, digital infrastructure excellently, intellectual infrastructure we have developed, and we are developing, and we will develop. The first 2, physical and digital, gives the presence. The third brings differentiation, but it does not give you the memorability. For that memorability, what we need to do is the 4th and the most important infrastructure we need to develop, which COVID-19 has compelled us to develop that infrastructure, is nothing but emotional infrastructure. That is what I see. And we have seen, we are communicating in this COVID-19, but still our communication has not reached. Say, for example, we are using the word social distancing. If you think of India and the rural population, they are not understanding what social distancing is. They are understanding physical distancing. Because the definition of social distancing is different in India than in the West. And therefore, we need to improve our communication. Our communication has to be reached, and that will be needed in this emotional infrastructure. We'll have to revision what kind of world we need. We will need learning adversity. Our adversity quotient has to be more. Our adjustment quotient has to be more. Our spiritual quotient has to be more. Our emotional quotient has to be more. Our social quotient has to be more. We need to learn what social intelligence is. The values which somehow some people had forgotten. We need to take the responsibility. We have to be curious, and we need to take the courageous decisions. I have interacted with some of the universities in India. They are still confused. They are not able to take decisions. What needs to be done? You need a courage for that. So with this, I can go on like this, but let me just thank all of you, but at the same time request you and also congratulate you for such a wonderful international conference. And it is not the congratulation only for AURO University. Am I audible? Om?
Hello. Yes, sir, you are audible, very much audible.
So I just don't congratulate only AURO University for organizing this international conference, but I congratulate all the partner institutions. Mr. Nayar, if you will agree with me, that all the institutions, those who are partner, deserve a congratulation. All the volunteers, those who have participated, deserve the congratulations. All students, younger generation, I believe in this young generation, always. I congratulate our technical team also. And I really thank those who had to disturb their sleep because of the time difference. It is convenient to Indians, but it may not be convenient to some of you. So sorry for that, and thank you for bearing with us. One thing is, now since we have come together with a purpose to organize this conference on imagining post-COVID-19, I request all of you to let us come together for a larger purpose than just organizing a conference. Because this conference will be over, then what? So let us find the larger purpose of bringing transformational leadership through this younger generation and transformational learning through our universities. I also thank all the Vice Chancellor. Please convey my regards to all the Vice Chancellors of these partner institutions, or the presidents or the rectors, whatever you call in your country, or the provost, whatever you call. Please thank them on behalf of me. And I am now going to request you three things. One is, let us come together to do a transnational project, so that through that project, we can really help to create some policies. Let the findings of those research project, the outcome of that research project should go to UN, should go to WHO, and should go to all the heads of the countries, nations, so that they should think what these academicians and researchers are telling us, what they're pointing us, what kind of development which everyone will have to do. So let us think together and create some project and submit it to some international funding agencies so that we can come out with research. I would be the happiest person if this happens. The second thing which I was talking with my dean just a week back, can we launch a course on reflection on pandemic from sociological point of view, from economical point of view, from psychological point of view, from political point of view, from scientific point of view, and from other disciplines point of view, can we create so that the future generation, whenever they will come across this kind of problems, they will be ready. So can we think of launching a course together and teaching online through the consortium which we have, think of some consortium, and on the certificate, all universities' signature can be there. So can we create, please think about that. Not a program, but a short duration courses, maybe 3 months or 6 months online. And lastly, I don't know, but my request to all of you is, since you are living in different parts of the world, can we take some topics and write a book on reflection on COVID-19? If we can come out with a book, reflection on COVID-19, by taking responsibilities by each universities and each of you, I think something can at least reach these people. So lastly, once again, I thank all the volunteers, especially the young people, all the teachers, those who have made this conference a great success. The technology support, my colleagues, not only in my university, but all the institutions and all across the universities. I am sure we will achieve something if we start somewhere. As Gandhi said, and I will end my speech with this example. When Gandhi participated in that salt agitation, then Pandit Nehru's father, Motilal Nehru, wrote a long letter to him, 4 or 5 pages. You are not going to achieve, and the Britishers are not going to listen to you. what you will do just walking by taking one that salt, a small piece of salt. Gandhi replied to him, and his reply was in one line, and that he said, "Karke dekho." Karke dekho means let us do it. Try and do it. You will achieve, and you know the history, what Gandhi has achieved in this country. I am sure if we take one step, which we have already taken by organizing this conference, we will achieve. My best wishes to all of you, and let us collaborate to transform. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your very thoughtful intervention. And showing us the way ahead by emphasizing the need to do research, leading way to some kind of policies. I now invite the Dean Academics to say a few words, and then I will conclude the session with thank you note.
Thank you, Dr. Om, for organizing this.
Dean sir, Rohit sir.
Please. Hello, am I audible? Yeah, fine. So thank you so much. The basically the brain behind this conference, Dr. Om, for coming out with this concept of having a virtual international conference on imagining world post-COVID. And the discussion started with that University of Hyderabad Center for Excellence, Professor Pramod Nayar, is guiding us to organize this. So we got more confident that we are having the support of people like Professor Nayar, so we should go ahead. And we discussed this with Professor Welukar, the Vice Chancellor, and we agreed upon. The issues were that what we are going to discuss into this conference, we need to identify the areas. And we listed out around 11 areas on which this conference should focus upon and deliberate, which is being shared by all participating institutions. And you all people very well discussed, deliberated, and highlighted few issues. What we need to think about is that this is the first pandemic where, or rather say, it is the first crisis which is coming on, where all world and all the activities pertaining to social, economic, whatever it is being totally closed. If you see the previous pandemic, it has never been happening that the world together has been closed. It was affecting countries, it was affecting regions, but all other things were going on smoothly. At this point of time, across the nation, the decision has been taken to close each and every activity. And the first time ever in history, the revenue generating streams of the nations is on closure. And at this point of time, what I have seen is many governments, now they are thinking of, because a lot of money has already been pumped into to manage this pandemic. So there is also economic crisis which is lurching upon us and saying we need to think beyond this also. So we aptly selected this topic, thinking of everybody talks about sociological, economic issues which is coming up. Let's talk about some human issues which is being coming out of this pandemic. And therefore, we decided that this will be the very right time for us to come out with this. There were few discussions happening, and for me, there are two important takeaways. One is, it is the history of each nation which should take a lesson from itself to face these scenarios. And people learn from their own mistakes. So every region, every nation, they have their own history. So that needs to be considered in order to formulate a good policy measures for coming generations. To be very honest, we are not prepared for it. Still, we are into a scenario where we are not sure whether it will go for next 2 months or next 3 months or 6 months. So we are still working on those guessworks, how things will come out to be. But to be very honest, as VC sir has rightly said, we need to connect sociologically and emotionally with each and every one in the nation to fight out these pandemic. People at this point of time, they don't have any work, they don't have anything to do. The sorry state of affairs is we have roads, but we cannot travel. We have money, but we cannot spend. We have friends, but we cannot meet them. And we have family to go out with them, but we cannot go. So these are the compelling situations which has been forcing us to think what we have done in past, which has created these kind of scenario. And I'm very thankful to all the participating institutions to come out with certain suggestions, which will definitely help us to carve out few steps, which will prepare us in future for these pandemics. And I definitely assure you that in whatever form the participating institution will look forward to, AURO University will always be there to put a hand forward in any kind of projects, any kind of events where we can together come and find out certain concrete steps. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and I hand over to Dr. Dwivedi.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would be failing in my duties if I don't thank the team involved in putting up this conference together. So the such a great magnitude cannot be organized by one person. In fact, plenty of helping hands go behind it, both in visible and invisible ways. Thanks are due to Professor Pramod K. Nayar, Professor Bashabi Fraser, Professor Johan Hoagland, Professor Slovic, Professor Greta Gaard, Professor Serenella, Professor Barbara Smith, my dear friend Professor Tarish Kher. I would also like to thank our founding president, Sri H.P. Ramaji, Dean Academics, Registrar Sir, our Chief Banking Officer, Mr. Sri Nayan Bankarji, our CEO, Mr. Suresh Mathurji, Kumar Kaushikji, and our Accounts Officer, Mr. Rakeshji. My colleagues from the School of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, my lovely students, Shruti Gangar in particular, who was present throughout the conference. I am immensely thankful to the technical support received from the IT cell and few other staff members, brilliantly led by Mr. Suraj Bhan and nicely executed by Manish Ghiwala, Shreya Mathur, Jignesh Desai, Ravi, Abhijit, Garima, and my colleague from the School of Journalism, Anupam and Kalpesh Chaudhary. Thanks to one and all who attended this conference, and hope our paths will cross again sometime very soon. With this, take care, stay safe, and bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.